Well, good morning again, everyone. This is Tom with ABC Computers, and welcome to our webinar this morning. We're very excited. We've got Andy Snook with us with FastPath. FastPath is a product that helps with compliance and audit preparation. Andy and his team have been working on compliance for over the past 10 years. They're a great partner with ABC, and we're very excited to have Andy share with us some of the education that he's gathered over the past several years and help all of us learn a little bit more on how we can do a better job with compliance and audit. So Andy, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll change the presenter so we'll see your screen.
Thanks, Tom. I actually really like your screen. You know, we can look at that all day if you want. So I actually went to Notre Dame. So for those of you that don't know, that's the Golden Dome at the University of Notre Dame there. So let me share my slides out and see if that works. All right. So if you can't see that, please raise your hand. I will make, just because we're talking about auditing and security doesn't mean we can't have some fun. And the only rules during my sessions are that you laugh at most of my stupid jokes, at least one of them. My name's Andy Snook. I work at FastPath. What we're going to talk about today is FastPath works, and we have tools that work with security, audit, compliance, but this isn't a FastPath commercial. We're going to talk about security on audit. So whether you use our tools or not, you can benefit from, the hope is that you can benefit from this hour, start to understand security a little better in your environment, start to understand what the auditors are looking for, and approach risk management maybe a little bit of a better way. If you have any questions at any time, the reason my email is up there, we're partners with ABC. The reason my email is up there is because if you have any questions about security, audit, compliance, please email me. If you're stuck, if the auditor asks you a question, email me. We can collaborate, work together, and get you an answer. And again, it's not about, you're not going to be on the clock for that. It's all we do is security, audit, and compliance. So we have a lot of the answers. We have auditors on staff. So with that, that's why that contact information's up there. You can also follow me on Twitter. So if you want to know what the local Cubs score is, or if you want to know the Notre Dame, how bad Notre Dame's poorly Notre Dame's doing in football, I'll probably tweet about that as well. So a little bit about me. I'm the president of FastPath. I'm certified in risk and information systems control. I've been working with ERP systems for over 15 years, and I have 8 years experience in auditing systems. So essentially I started off doing SAP implementations and then moved into the Dynamics world, and have been working with the various Dynamics products for about the last about 15 years. So this is a slide about Dynamics GRC Day. If this topic is important to you and you have to live through security, audit, compliance at your organization, you might be the inconvenient auditor, right? You're the one that has to play defense against the auditors, or offense if you're lucky enough. We're going to have a day dedicated to this topic. So it is the day before Convergence in Atlanta. So that's March 3rd. It's an all-day conference. We're very excited to be presenting along with Armanino, Protiviti, PwC, and also the Dynamics communities are sponsoring as well. And really what we're going to talk about is how do you set up a risk management framework at your organization. So understanding where your key risks are, building business processes around that, and then how do you audit Dynamics inside of that framework. So the goal would be is to go from, hey, we just went public and now all of a sudden I have to learn about Sarbanes-Oxley and I have to implement this at my organization, to you have a usable system. So again, that's in Atlanta. We are offering CPE credits this year, but we're real excited to be able to do that presentation. And again, it's for anyone using Dynamics. It's a little bit like the session today. The goal is you already own Dynamics and you want to have better security, you want to have better risk management, you want to have a better audit experience. That's really where we're pointed to. So you get to connect with auditors and also with a lot of other companies that may have the same challenges that you do. And I also think, right, Trish, that ABC, we have a special code if you're an ABC client that special code for pricing with that too. So you can ask Tom for that or anyone on the call today, and we can help you get a special pricing on that as well. So what are we going to talk about today? So that was a little bit about the future, right, in March. Seems like March is a long ways away, but it's really not. So what we're going to talk about today is what does security and controls mean? Because we see at our customers a lot of confusion with that. So we'll talk about what it really means, what auditors are talking about, why it's important to you and to your, potentially to your organization, some of the mistakes and challenges we see at our clients. Sometimes this is the commiseration slide. Sometimes it's like, oh, it's not just me, right? There are other people that have these same challenges. Then we'll talk about how to identify risk. We'll talk about translating that identified risk to Microsoft Dynamics. And then we'll talk about some, what I would call the low-hanging fruit of auditing Dynamics. So understanding who has access, systems access, audit trails, what did they do with that access, or change log audit trails, right? Segregation of duties, and then we'll talk a little bit about manual journal entries. Those last two items are things that the oversight board are really keying in on this year, and if they're keying in on it, it means the audit firms will, which means that you should be too. So we'll talk about not only those things at a high level, but how you can implement strategies around those different pieces your own organization. So what does security and controls mean? So security is, the application securities refers to the features inside of NAV. Right? So in NAV, you can be assigned a role, and that role has different permissions. So your role might be AP clerk, and your permission may be maintain vendor master data, right? Or raise a purchase order, and so on. So there are all sorts of different areas that you can secure within NAV, different objects, right? So you have tables and menus and different things. That's the application security. So what Microsoft builds, and it comes out of the box with NAV, that's application security. Controls refers to all the processes that you have around the application or other, either a process or some sort of procedure that you might implement around NAV. So an example of that would be using Word, right? So anytime somebody creates a purchase order over $1,000, their manager needs to sign off on that for approval. It goes through that approval workflow and has a signature to it. Or that's an example of an automated control, right, through the software. Or another control might be we do manual journal entry reconciliation on a monthly basis. So somebody else is reviewing that. So it's completely outside of NAV, but it directly relates to your financial system because you're dealing with journal entries. So we see a lot of our customers struggling with that concept of there's the application security and then their controls, and they don't really see that those two things blend together. So you'll hear that a lot as I talk, is how do you get to how can you tie those two things together, because your ultimate goal is blending the application security with your controls through your business processes, because every organization is different. You're going to have different controls, different security requirements, and we'll talk about how to blend those two things together. Typically, we see challenges at our customers when you don't tie those two things together, and people take a very binary approach to security. So they'll either say, well, everybody should just be set to super user and everyone in our organization is super user because I can't lock anybody out, or they take the other approach and they say no one should have access to anything and your security is locked down so much that you can't that it starts to impact your productivity as a business. So what you want to do is, if you recognize that you can put controls in place in lieu of application security, you still have control of the data, you still have visibility of it, but you're maintaining your productivity level. So as we go, you'll hear me talk about security, which I'm talking about your application security roles, and then we'll talk about controls, which are things like positive pay with your bank, the workflow, journal entry reconciliation, those types of things. So why are security and controls important at your organization? First and foremost, it can mitigate fraud and malicious activity. So ERP systems, many times, Microsoft is building great products. NAV is very powerful, but the more powerful it gets and the more you rely on it, the more risk you inherit there, right? So if you put your inventory, your payables, your receivables, all of the handling of cash inside of that, you're increasing your risk of someone committing fraud at the organization. So they start paying their phone bill through as the AP clerk, or they start changing the price groups for specific inventory items so they can sell those to their buddies, or they're writing off the customer balances for their friends. So if you have good security and controls, you start to mitigate that risk. You would see that fraud very quickly before it happens. So if your AP clerk is pushing her cable bill through the company, it wouldn't take you very long to catch up to that because you're reviewing all of those payments, or you've built it as such that she wouldn't be able to do that. The other thing it does is it helps management make better decisions. You can seize opportunities because you know where your risks are, so you start to ask yourself questions like, hey, do we have enough money to hire another salesperson? Do we have enough money to acquire that other company? Or should we be other business decisions? You already understand risk. You have security and controls in place, so you understand where the risks may be as you're making decisions, so you can make faster decisions. The other thing is the management is confident that they're basing those decisions off of accurate reporting from your financial system. So if the question is, do we have enough money to hire another person, we know that the budget is accurate. We know that somebody in the accounting department hasn't been posting transactions to the wrong account and making it look like our marketing budget is completely overspent, right? So we can't go to convergence this year because we've already spent too much on travel. Well, we haven't really spent that much on travel. It's that somebody's been pushing these expenditures to the wrong account. So instead of them being office supplies, now it's coming up as training, education, and travel, and you're making poor decisions. So if you have good security and controls in place and you're making sure that things are going, the right people are putting data into the right places at the right time, management is more confident that they're making decisions based on that accurate information. It achieves process efficiencies because you can start to, once you understand where security is and the controls are, you can start to you have more confidence in what you're doing. It's easier to train your employees because you have a set way of doing things with controls and business processes. So you know that if you hire a new AP clerk, that AP clerk knows exactly how to perform their job function. You also know that someone is reviewing their work. So whether that person has been there for 30 years or 30 minutes, that their work will be reviewed, or their controls around that work. So you're starting to get more efficiencies out of your employees. And then once you start to become proficient at your business processes, then you can also start to add in more automated controls, so you get to electronic controls. So you can have ABC come in and help you implement more workflows and sign-offs and those types of items, instead of having to sign off on a paper copy and store it in a banker's box in the basement with your red stapler there for the next 7 years. So it helps you move faster through training, confidence in the employees. It increases management confidence. So one of the things that management has to do is sign off on audits. They understand that if you have those security and controls in place, they can more easily sign off on those audit reports. It also increases management confidence, like I said, because they're making better decisions, because they're confident that the financial information is correct. And this last one here is compliance requirements. So by the time we finish this session, there'll probably be 2 more regulations that companies have to live up to. So some of those regulations are things like Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA. If you do projects with the government, like the Department of Defense, there's an audit that you have to go through there. You might just go through a standard audit because you're a smaller company, and if you have audited financials, you're going to have better luck getting a loan with your bank. Or if you're a nonprofit, having security and controls in place is a key thing, because if you have fraud at a nonprofit, or if you fail an audit, that can impact your nonprofit status, or it can also impact your reputation and your donations, right? So, you know, if your main spokesperson gets caught doing performance-enhancing drugs, that's very bad for your, you know, your Livestrong donations there. So you want to make sure that you have controls in place from a financial perspective that wouldn't impact your nonprofit cause or any of the donations there. So a lot of companies, there are compliance requirements like Sarbanes-Oxley, but, you know, when we go down to Atlanta for Convergence, we'll have people walk by our booth and go, oh, we don't have SOX. So fortunately, we avoided that whole thing. And I always kind of scratch my head. It's like, if I'm a business owner, and even if I own a small distribution company, you know, if I have a fraud, if somebody embezzles $150,000 from my small distribution company, that can put me out of business. I may not make payroll next month. If a company the size of Coca-Cola has $150,000 embezzlement, that's not even a rounding error to them, right? It doesn't even show up on the radar. So having security and controls in place, knowing who has access to your data, knowing who has access to your cash, even if you don't fall under Sarbanes-Oxley, should be important to most organizations. To every organization, and most organizations, whether they know it or not, engage in risk management and engage in security and controls. They just don't have a formalized way of doing it. So it's really important to any organization is just how formal are you in that approach. So some of the challenges we see at our clients, and before I get into this a little bit, is that I know we talked about, you know, what do you need to know before the auditors ask. So this session isn't necessarily going to just say, hey, if you do, is a checklist, and maybe 30 people drop off now. It's not just a checklist to say, hey, if you do these 5 things, the auditors you're going to pass your audit, no problem. Auditors are going to love you. This is more about, if you have risk management and security and controls in place at your organization, a byproduct of that is having an easier time as you go through your audits. And I will talk in the end about some of the things you can do to have a better audit experience, but the cornerstone of a better audit is having this in place. This is what the auditors are looking for. So this is some of the things that we see at our clients, what they struggle with when they go through the audits. So I know if some people are like, hey, just tell me how to get rid of the auditors. That's not really what it's about. It kind of is. So what we see at our clients, access security is a low priority for the project team. So when you implement an ERP, I always use the example of an ERP implementation is like building a house, right? And so when you build a house, what are you really focused on? What are the fun things about building a house? What's the kitchen look like? What's the master bathroom? You know, kitchens, bathrooms, the deck, the landscaping. You've got all these cool, fun things to think about. You know, where are we going to put the pool table in the basement? Things like that. People don't really think about the plumbing in the house, right? You don't think about the septic system. If you go in to buy a house, you're wowed by the kitchen. You don't say, man, this toilet flushes and it's fantastic. Well, security sometimes is like the septic system in the plumbing in a house. People in the ERP implementation are very excited about all the automated procedures and all the cool things you can do with purchase orders and purchasing and payables and all these other great things that NAV does. And in the end, you just say, I just kind of assume that it has a security system, right? Yeah, check that box, move on. During the implementation, a lot of times it's the same thing. You spend all your time up front designing the chart of accounts, doing all these other things, and in the end, you just kind of say, we'll just set everybody to super user and then we'll figure it out later. And we see a lot of our customers in that position where we went live and everybody was super user, and that's just the way it's always been. And so it's not really a focus for organizations during the implementation. And we see that across all ERP products, whether it's SAP, Dynamics, QuickBooks. It doesn't matter how big or small you are. That's just kind of the way it goes in implementations. Process controls are not part of the consideration. This is what I talked about on that first slide. Companies will lock down security so much because they don't think that, hey, our end users can have access to vendors and printing checks because we use positive pay with the bank. So we have a control in place. We don't have to lock down our payables processing as much because we have a control outside. some companies, and especially I'm going to pick on IT people a little bit, IT and admins, they're very black and white with certain things, and they think that the security is either all right or all wrong. We're going to lock everybody out of everything as much as possible, and they don't think outside from a business process perspective. So when you don't consider that, sometimes when you don't consider your process controls as part of your security and control environment, people tend to overdo their security model, and then that ends up impacting their productivity. It also makes it more difficult to add new people, to change the security model, so that's something else we see. Security design is the domain of the IT or system admin, and the business isn't aware. So hey, the IT people are the one that set up our purchasing manager role. The IT people set up the order entry clerk role. I have no idea what that is. I just pick up the phone and say, Homer needs access to customers right now. That happens in a black box in the office down the hall. I don't know how that happens. The problem with that is, who understands security requirements better? The business process owner or the IT admin, right? So if I'm the purchasing manager, I want to know who can raise a purchase order. I want to understand, why does somebody in the HR department have access to create a purchase order? Oh, because we order office supplies, and so it's more efficient for her to be able to do that. Where if you tell the IT admin, hey, look, IT admin are conditioned, IT people in general, this is a generalization, they're conditioned to solve problems and to move things off their desk, right? And there's some help desk systems that they get rewarded the faster they close tickets. So if somebody calls up and says, hey, this person needs access to print checks, you're now relying on that IT admin to say, well, does that person really need access to that? Is that a risk? That should be up to the business process owner to design the security, and the IT person might be the one that understands how to flip the switches in NAV and understands which things to assign. So the design of the security needs to be pushed back to the business process owners, or you need to have more of an understanding of what you're asking for. That's, in a best practice way, that's how you want it to work. Don't leave everything just to the Dynamics admin or your IT department. So no ongoing monitoring of process controls. So this is what I'd call your overgrown garden. So you did do a great job of implementing security. So Tom's team at ABC came in and made this awesome security model for you. They did consider the septic tank when you moved in, right? And they built this elegant system. I'm mixing my analogies here, but that's fine. So they built this great security model, and they have all the process controls around it, and you did a great months from now, nobody's looked at it, and now nobody's at the garden, so everything's overgrown. You have things tied up into knots because people change roles. Your business change, your monitor those process controls, and you don't monitor security, then you're going to end up having an issue down the line, because you have that overgrown that overgrown garden concept. So you need to go in there and make sure that you understand that. The other thing it does is it helps you prepare for your audit. So the audit want to see that you have controls in place. It's one thing to say, hey, we implemented workflow and all these electronic signatures around our purchasing process. Well, that's, if I'm an auditor, I come in and go, wow, that's great. Really, yeah, show me how it works. Okay, well, when was the last time you reviewed that nobody turned off workflow? Or did you actually monitor that no one changed the purchasing limit for someone else? So how do you know that, our purchasing, we set up purchasing limits for everyone at $1,000. Well, how do I know that it didn't get turned off 2 months after you went live? How do I know that somebody else's, the hierarchy changed, so now, somebody's changing or approving their own transactions? So it's one thing to say that you have the controls in place. It's another thing to demonstrate that you're reviewing, that they're effective, that they're reliable. That's what the auditor wants to see. It's two things. One, that you have the control, and two, that you have evidence that you're reviewing it to make sure that it's in place ongoing. So no consideration of segregation of duties. As I mentioned at the beginning, the Oversight Board is really pushing on segregation of duties over the last couple of years. A lot of times what we hear from our clients is we'll have somebody call up and say, hey, I have issues with my auditors want me to take a closer look at segregation of duties. I'm not getting away with saying that it's too hard. So a lot of people just say it's too hard in NAV, I can't do it, or we're too small. That we only have, and we have a publicly traded client that uses Dynamics that only has 5 users in Dynamics, and they have a solid SOD methodology set up and in place. So a lot of companies will say we're too small, it's too hard. It kind of worked with the auditors, but the last couple of years that hasn't worked. So you need to start building a methodology, and we'll talk about some methodologies that you can use in a smaller, mid-size environment, and then we'll talk about how to deploy that. But the answer of going to the auditors and saying, yeah, it's just kind of hard, and yeah, I'll get, it'll be fine, it isn't flying with anymore. You're not getting away with it any longer. The dilution of go-live security goes back to the ongoing monitoring process controls, kind of the weed your garden type of an idea. The inability to report on the current security setup. So one of the challenges with native NAV is there are exactly 0 security reports out of the box. So, okay, great, back to, Tom's team did this great job implementing your security, but you can't report on it. So yeah, I think it works, but do you know who has access to vendors? Do you know who has access to customers? Do you know, I'd use fiscal periods, but I know in NAV that's a very ethereal term, so we'll skip that one. But you have to be able to, a lot of customers will have a security model, but they can't actually go and review it. And that kind of ties back to the no ongoing monitoring of process controls. And then a lot of times companies will build these massive customizations in place of just a standard business process. So they will cut, and what I mean by that is they'll customize NAV and build all these custom screens that won't allow people to change certain data at certain times, and once an order goes to an invoice, you can't change the unit price, so it locks these 10 users out of that field, but if you're this person over here, and they build all these customizations where an audit trail report may have worked, or a simple sign-off may have worked, or there may have been a native feature, and if they would have thought a little more around a process control instead of trying to secure it within the application through a customization. So they build these giant, and we've seen companies spend over $1 million on a customization, and they could have just solved it using an audit trail report, and in the end, actually, that's what they ended up doing. So again, you want to make sure that you understand security and controls, because a lot of times those customizations get built because you're talking about security and controls and risk management, but you don't have a formal process for it. So even though that's at the root of the problem, but you don't really recognize that's the root of the customization. So the first thing you need to do in any organization, right? So we've talked about all these problems that everybody has. Okay, get to the point. How am I going to fix this stuff? That some of those things may have said, yeah, that's me. Okay, let's start fixing it. So the first thing you want to do is identify your corporate risk, or a risk framework. So every business faces risk of some kind, right? Whether it's environmental, right? So we live in Iowa, we have tornadoes. Trish, she lives in Florida, they have hurricanes. Well, in Iowa, I don't have to prepare myself for a hurricane. If I have to prepare myself for a hurricane, the world has bigger problems than our business, right? That'd be bad if there were hurricanes in Iowa. So they could be environmental, they can be external, like what if Microsoft changes the way that NAV works, and we've built everything around that. That's a risk. You have competitive risk. You might have financial risk. So every business is going to face a risk of some kind, and every company is going to have a different risk tolerance. So for some companies, like back what I said before, if somebody embezzles $150,000 from your company, that could put you out of business. If you're big enough, well, if that gets by, I'm not too concerned about it. So that risk tolerance plays a fact too. So your risk is going to vary based on business process and vary by industry, right? So depending on what season it is, so in Iowa, farmers have risk based on season, the weather, how big your farm is, all those types of things. And then you can see some of the examples. There's fires, earthquakes, theft, and financial. But one of the examples I use here is that Heineken, right? Everybody knows what Heineken does, and I guess it's still only even on the East Coast, it's too early for a Heineken. But Heineken their risks are around inventory, right? So they have physical security to mitigate the risk of someone stealing a case of beer, right? So they have cameras in the warehouse, they have locks in the warehouse, they track their product through the trucks all the way to the store. They know exactly where it's at. They also have security inside of their application to make sure that somebody isn't changing the unit price for a case of beer to send to their buddies, or they're changing their customer price groups and those types of areas. But a lot of that risk is based on inventory. Now, Dice.com, they're a career website for IT people, so I always ask people, do you know what Dice is? And all the IT guys in the crowd sit on their hands because they're sitting next to their controller. It's like, no, I don't have my resume out there at all. So it's a place where you can go find an IT job. Well, Dice doesn't have physical inventory, right? There's no warehouse that has jobs out in the back. But their risk is more based on financial risk, right, of handling of cash. Their risk may be based on, how they handle credit cards, because if they had issues with PCI compliance and lose their ability to process credit cards, that would be detrimental to their business. So Heineken's risks are very different than Dice's risks, but they're both large organizations that have risk management. So every company on this call today faces risk, but it's going to be very different for every single company that's on the call. Now, there are some standard ones like handling of cash. That's always high risk, right? Because once cash is gone, cash is gone. I'm trying to teach my 5-year-old that lesson right now. It's not going very well. But the idea is that, handling of cash is one thing, but then as your business processes and your industry start to diverge, so do your risks. So what do we want to do is start to identify at your organization, where are your risks? So you start to think about your risks and sit down. What you do is sit down in a room and just start brainstorming ideas. And this is what we're going to do at GRC Day, is we're going to walk through exactly how to build your risk catalog. And we'll go through an example exercise of Protiviti is going to teach the class on how do you develop your risks, where your risks are, how do you rank them based on priority and probability, right? And so that you come out of that session at GRC Day with the ability to go back home to your organization and have a risk assessment workshop and start to understand that. But those risk assessments are going to be the foundation of how you audit your NAV system, and it's going to make it a lot easier to audit NAV. So we've built our risks, right? We understand that we're Heineken, and a lot of our risk is around inventory. So what we want to do now is, now that we understand where all of our high risks are, we want to start translating those risks to key systems in our organization. So what you do is you document business processes. So if you've ever done that, you go into Visio, you sit in a room, you put up sticky notes, and then you translate that into Visio. It's kind of like that Schoolhouse Rock thing, how a bill becomes a law kind of thing, that deal. It's the same idea. How does a lead in our company eventually become an invoice, and how does it get paid? How do we get cash? What's our order to cash process at our company? And that's another thing we're going to do at GRC Day, is there'll be a session where we teach you how to build those business process maps, how to tie those business process maps to your key systems, and then how to tie those key systems to risks, and therefore build your audit plan for the year based on that. So you'll come out of that day with, how do I build my risks? How do I build my business processes? How does that yield an audit plan going forward? So what we do is we document those business process maps. So again, how does an order become cash in our organization? And then you start to map those business processes to the key systems. So, well, at the beginning, when they come in as a lead, we're putting them into dynamic CRM. And then we actually create the customer in CRM, and then there's an integration with CRM to NAV where it pushes that to NAV, and then we push it outside to a separate credit card system. So you have a lot of different systems that might be involved, but now you know where your high-risk systems are. And so for the people on the call today, NAV is a key system in a lot of your business processes. So then what you do is you take those business process maps and you start to base your application security on the business process. So you say, hey, the AP clerk doesn't need to be involved into order to cash, so we want to make sure that they don't need that that functionality within NAV. You can take that away. So you're building your security model based on your business processes, which are based on where your risks are in your organization. So once you have those roles and their functions defined, you can start putting that into your security model. The other thing that allows you to do is you can start to build your documentation for NAV off those business processes, and then it's also going to help you build end user training. So you can say, hey, this is how we create a purchase order at our company. This is the user that creates it. This is when the sign-off occurs. This is when we can release it. This is what happens if it gets canceled. And you start to flow through the entire thing, and it makes it easy when you hire a new person to train that person on what your business process is, where the controls are, and where some of the risks may be in that process. So when you go through and you start defining these business process maps, you want to do the highest risk business processes first. So again, if we go back to Heineken, it's everything that's order to the cash or anything that involves inventory. Pick the top 5 business processes. So you're saying this is high risk to my organization. I'm Heineken. I've defined what's high risk. And this is a place where you can start to push back on your auditor, because sometimes the auditors will come in and say, I really want to look at procure to pay. And you can say, you know what, we think this is why we've defined this order to cash as being high risk, why we're focusing on this right now. We understand that you see procure to pay as high risk, but you can start to push back and say, we know our business better than you do, and this is why we're auditing that. And you can start to use that to push back on the auditors. Or we've seen companies where the auditors come in and said, I want to audit order to cash in your Dynamics environment, and the company says, we don't use Dynamics as our order entry system. We only use Dynamics for GL and AP, and the auditors are standing there saying, but my manager told me to come and do this. So who do you think understands your business better, you or the junior auditor that comes with the auditing plan, right? So it gives you that ability, if you're basing that off of risk, to kind of push back there. So what you're going to do is you're going to identify those high-risk business processes, map them. Ideally, you do every single business process, but you do have other jobs to do, right? You want to audit. That's why you take a risk-based approach, is do the highest risk areas, document those processes. Ideally, you do every process in your company, but then each year you'd focus on a few, because a general rule of thumb in auditing is you can really only focus on about 5 processes at a time, because other than that, you end up spending way too much time and money, and it starts to become prohibitive. So start off, if you've never done this, start off based on the highest risk. So once you've defined the business processes, you can start to map those risks into your business process. You know, what would happen if somebody walked out the door? What would happen if somebody intercepted a check? What would happen for all of our vendors to their home address? How would we handle that? And then, so you define those risks. You define the reviews around the around that. So one of the things that you want to do is, once you define those reviews, right, because those reviews are going to be what you show the auditors. Sorry, I think I may have lost you guys for a second there. So essentially what you want to do is define your reviews around those business processes, right, to say we review manual journal entries on a monthly basis because we see this as high risk. And then you're telling the auditor, here's the review we planned on doing, and then here's the evidence that that review has occurred. You can add that right to the business process. And so now you're starting to build your audit plan, and starting to build, once you have that audit plan, it's going to make your audits go much easier. So the last key thing there is provide the evidence that the review has been done, right? So we planned on doing monthly journal entry reconciliation. We did it. Here's the person that did it. Here's the sign-off that the person actually performed the review. So that's where this starts to blend into getting prepared for your audit and being able to hand off that plan to the auditors. So one of the easiest things to do from a review perspective, and one of the things that any auditor will ask you for, is who has access to your system. And so one of the things that you want to do when you're analyzing access, well, one of the mistakes a lot of companies make is they think that the auditors want to see a report that says, here's all the access to NAV. These are all my users and all their access in the system. The auditors don't want to see that. Well, I mean, they might ask for it because they're going to run tests, but what they want to see is that you know who has access to the system, that you've been reviewing those reports. So it's hard if you take a standard report out of Dynamics and just say, show me everything that every user has access to. That could be a potentially huge report. Additionally, a lot of that report is going to contain things that are very low risk. So is it a big deal that someone has somebody's fax number? I'm not really concerned about that. I am concerned about somebody that can impact vendor master data, right? So then you want to take a risk-based approach, and so you're going back to that risk framework. So back to Heineken, you're saying our risks are based on inventory. Who has control of inventory and pricing and being able to do transfers? So now I can start to look at, that's where my concerns are. Those are where I want to focus in on who has the ability in my system to do that. Because if you've ever gone through an audit, or if you're an IT person or the security admin, the call doesn't come in of, I need to know what Homer Simpson has access to, right? The call comes down as, I need to know who can create purchase orders right now. You're reporting based on function, not by user, right? So you're saying, I need to know who can perform this specific function. The average system, dynamic system, has over 5,000 access points. So if you print out a report across every user across 5,000 access points, it's going to be huge. Your average ERP system only has 30 to 40 high-risk access points. So somebody with Excel open can do the math of a percentage of, that's not very many. So whether you're using SAP, Dynamics, QuickBooks, they're typically 30 to 40 high-risk access points. And we do have a template listing of those access points that if anybody wants them, just shoot us an email and we can send those to you. More than happy to share those with you. But those things are like, who can maintain master data? Who can maintain configuration within the system? Who can process transactions, update general ledger things? So post to the general ledger. And so what you want to do is your access report should be based on those 30 to 40 high-risk functions instead of the 5,000 access points. So we have a case study with one of our customers that they were doing the right thing, right? They were reviewing access on a quarterly basis because they knew they needed to know who had access to their system, but they were reviewing a user access report. No filters, just tell me who has access. And that report was over 1 million rows long, so you couldn't import it into Excel. They were printing it out, and the controller and the security admin would sit in a room and filter through that. I mean, that's insane. And as an auditor, I come in and say, what's the reliability of that process? I mean, you might get through that once, but do I really believe that you're going through it quarterly? B, are you doing it accurately? And you know, it's extremely hard to make that a reliable, repeatable process. So they came to us. We helped them implement the risk-based approach, right? We said, hey, don't take the 5,000 access points. Use the 30 to 40. They reduced that report down to 500 lines. So now it's something that they can review very quickly. They started to do it monthly, and the auditor has more confidence that it's actually being done. The other thing is, it's a lot easier to find anomalies. Hey, wait a minute, why can Homer create a vendor, right? That's a pretty big risk. So it's easier to find the anomalies and the risks in a smaller data set than it is to find it in 1 million records. So even though it seems easy, I could just say, yeah, review your NAV security because every auditor is going to ask you if you did it. There is an approach, but again, it goes back to that risk framework you built at the beginning. The other thing you want to do is understand administrative access. Understand, first off, that most auditors understand that somebody has to have the keys to the kingdom, right? That's just the way it is. I'm the admin. I might be the controller. You might not have an IT admin. Hey, somebody has to be able to fix issues. The fastest way to do it is super user. If you are going to use the super user role, just make sure that you understand how it works, what it does, understand, the bigger thing to do is make sure that you understand the users that have access to it, right, that you're very aware of the users that have been assigned that role, and then be able to provide a description or an explanation to the auditors of, hey, this is why Krusty the Clown is set up as a super user, right? This is why he fixes everything for us. That's great. So again, it's be aware that people have been assigned to that, understand what it means, what functionality it provides, and then monitor it. So you don't have people in the AP department that are all set up to super user. So again, a lot of what the auditors are going to look for is, are you aware for that? Now they may go, even if you run a report on a monthly basis to review who's been assigned to super user, they still may ask, and you demonstrate that, they still might go in and test to see the users that are assigned to super user, but they're going to have more confidence in what you're doing if you're reviewing that report on a monthly basis, and the odds are the next time they come in, they're not going to look at that, right? So again, you're being more proactive than reactive to what the auditors are asking for. So application security versus database security. The application security is very easy. It's the roles inside of NAV, but a lot of our customers forget that there's a pretty powerful tool that sits behind NAV called Microsoft SQL. And there are a lot of powerful DBAs that understand where data sits inside of Microsoft SQL. So what the key term is, you want to demonstrate that you have control of your financial data, right? That you know who has access to it, you know the changes that are being made. Well, your application security and your role in NAV make sure that nobody can change data through NAV, but how are you monitoring who has access to those SQL databases? How do you know that a DBA didn't come in and give themselves administrative access to that and they're changing vendor information, remit to addresses? We came across a case, they're a customer of ours now, where one of their developers wrote a SQL trigger that every time a credit card number would come through the system, it would push that out as a text message to his phone, the credit card number. Well, that's bad, but none of that was inside of NAV. It was all through the database. So be aware that you need to monitor your SQL database to understand the users that are set up, the permissions they have, understand who the admins are, and make sure that you have a security methodology around not only your application, but around the database, and that you're doing reviews there, because we see a lot of people get tripped up as it goes to the database side. They have a very elegant model in the application, and then the database is wide open and they have issues there. So again, it's something you want to take a look at. So audit trails. So this is what audit trails, it's not just a clever name. Who's been making changes within the system? It's one thing to say that Homer has access to vendors, but did Homer ever show up to work to actually create a vendor? You know, he was probably off doing, I don't think Homer's been to the power plant in like 500 episodes, right? So he never shows up at work. So we understand that he has access, but he's not what we would call in auditing consuming that access by performing a transaction. So again, if you decide audit trails are a control, you don't have to implement audit trails, you don't have to look at the logging, but if you decide to implement it as a control, you want to take a risk-based approach. And the reason for that is because if when you deploy audit trails of any kind, it's going to have an impact on performance. You're going to start creating a lot of data. You have to store that data somewhere. You have to maintain that data. So it's a very effective control, but you have to make sure that you understand that there are risks associated with the control for the other risks, right? So one of the main ways, if you decide to use an audit trail tool or the change log, is take a risk-based approach, right? If this was a drinking game, which it probably shouldn't be at 10 o'clock in the morning, but if, you know, you'll hear me say take a risk-based approach again and again. It goes back to that risk framework. Only set up an audit trail on those areas that are high risk. Master data, posting, those types of areas, configuration changes, changes to code, because you don't need to set up, we get a call at least once a week that says, my auditors told me I need to audit every single change that's happening in Dynamics. Don't ever do that. That's a bad idea. It's going to create so much data. You'll never find anomalies. You'll create your own haystack worth of data, It also will have a performance impact. Quite honestly, if you did that, Dynamics may not even open for you to make any changes. So again, focus on the key areas, right? Vendors, configuration, cash receipts. But the other thing is drill down one level farther to the fields. So if I decide to audit vendors, make sure that you know the fields that are important. That I want to key on payment terms, credit limits, addresses, pricing, but do I really care about the fax number if the fax number changes? That if the contact number changes from an audit perspective, is that high risk? That might be something that somebody wants to know, but you get down to that field level, because every single thing that you're asking your audit logging tool to track is creating another transaction and creating more data. So every transaction is going to add to the load on the server, and then you're also having to store and report through more data. So not only focus on the high-risk areas, but focus on the high-risk fields for each one of those areas. And the key things that we're looking for is who changed the data, right? Was it an appropriate person? When was it changed? What time of day was it? So the example I always use is, why was somebody in the system at 11:30 at night on St. Patrick's Day, and when St. Patrick's Day was a Saturday? That seems like a very odd time and an odd day to be performing transactions, and the odds of high accuracy on St. Patrick's Day are very low, right? So you want to make sure, because those are the anomalies you're going to start looking for, and that's what the auditors were looking for. What are the things out of the norm? You can also look at oddball values, right? So if you start seeing numbers that always end in 00 or 999999, it's those types of values, or whatever your credit hitting different thresholds constantly, numbers just below $1,000 or 10,000. You're looking for the when it was changed in those specific values, and then was it changed the right way? And that's kind of an ethereal concept in terms of, was it changed, like I mentioned before, did the unit price change after something went to an invoice? Was the change made based on our business rules and our business process? So you're looking for changes that happen outside of the normal business process or the recommended business processing. So that's really what you're looking for with audit trails. But again, take that risk-based approach. Make sure you understand the logging tool that you're using, how it works, where the data is stored, and then make sure that you can easily write reports, generate reports that will easily show you, help you find those anomalies of who changed it, when was it changed, and was it changed the right way. Segregation of duties, again, this is a big point for the oversight board this year. A lot of companies will say, I'm too small, it's too hard. So one of the things you want to analyze with your segregation of duties, the first thing you need to do is come up with a methodology. And one of the things that you have to consider when you're implementing your SOD methodology is the balance between preventative controls and productivity. So a preventative control is going to flat out block a user, for example, from, well, if you're a smaller team, right, and you only have 2 people in your AP department, well, does that mean that no one can go on paternity leave, no one can go on vacation, nobody, Jimmy can't oh, did I lose you guys? Uh-oh.
We can hear you. It was a little choppy, but you're good.
Okay. Okay, so we had a water main break outside, so so I apologize for that. I wasn't planning on that happening today. So one of the things with the segregation of duties is preventative versus productivity is you can't have anybody leave the office because you only have 2 people. Well, you can still demonstrate segregation of duties, mitigate segregation of duties risk with 2 people in your AP department without locking them out of all the functionality in NAV. So you have to balance that whole idea of preventative versus productivity. So the first step is deciding how you're going to approach segregation of duties. There are a couple of ways. One, you can do it through application security, right, to say, I want to make sure that this person can't create a general ledger account and can't create a journal entry. Another way to do it would be doing it through transaction sampling to say, so it would be after the fact, right? It's a detective control where you're saying, did this person create the vendor and create this purchase order? So you're matching those transactions. That's a lot of reporting after the fact. You can do this on the application security side. You can take two approaches. One is preventing the user from ever inheriting that access, right? If I already have access to vendors, I can't even assign that person the ability to create purchase orders. Or you can take a detective methodology to application security and say, I recognize that that user has access to vendors and purchase orders, but that's okay in our environment because I'm bound that's what we have to do to have the level of productivity required. But I will and play them the ability in the application, right, back to application security, but I'm going to put a control in place. I'm blending the two together so that those two are reviewing their work, or someone from a different department, or I'm using positive pay with the bank. So you're starting to build that methodology. And again, different methodologies. In smaller and mid-sized environments, I would recommend using a detective methodology because it's going to yield more productivity. In larger environments, like when you in lots of SAP and Oracle environments, you see a lot of preventative environments because you have enough people during your AP process for one person to create the vendor, the other somebody else creates the invoice, the other person prints the check, some other guy licks the envelope, you have somebody else take the envelope to the mailbox. You have the volume, the human capital to do that, but in smaller organizations you don't. So you have to rely more on the controls and less on the application security. So that's typically in smaller and mid-sized environments. We see more success using the detective control where you recognize the risk and then mitigate it with a control. So one of the things that you have to do is build a set of conflicts, right? And this is a challenge for a lot of people. It's, well, okay, I do a segregation of duties analysis, but I don't even know what the rules I'm looking for, right? I can, everybody knows you shouldn't be able to create a vendor and then print a check, right? I create cash and walk out the door with the check. But there are several other rules. We have a Fortune 50 actually client that only has 11 rules in their segregation of duties rule set. We have another client that has over 600 rules in their rule set. So what you need to do is build a rule set that works for you. There are some examples of generic SOD rule sets out there. ISACA, which is ISACA, they have an example rule set. If somebody wants a link to that, we can provide that link as well to that information. But that rule set is going to be the framework that you use for your segregation of duties. So again, going all the way back to procure to pay is a key business process and a high risk. So a lot of our SOD risks are going to be based on vendors remitting payments and those types of things. So the next thing you do is you identify the conflicts based on your methodology. Is it an ad hoc reporting on the transaction side? Is it through application security? Are you blocking the access? Identify those conflicts. And then what you want to do is mitigate those conflicts. If you are using a methodology that says, hey, I recognize that this person can create a vendor and a purchase order, but I mitigate that because we have a workflow in place of purchase order approvals, you want to build a mitigation for the risk, so recognize the risk, build a mitigation, which is a control, assign that control to the risk, and now you've demonstrated that to the auditor. So the auditor, when I come in and audit SOD risks, the questions I'm asking are, what's your rule set? Where are your risks? Do you know where your risks are in your environment? And then what are you doing about it? So what are you doing about it could be I've assigned this mitigation to this risk, and then you have to demonstrate that control is actually effective and in place. Or you say, well, what we're doing about it is we're re-implementing our security. We haven't totally fixed it yet. We recognize it as a risk, but we're fixing it. So that segregation of duties, using those methodologies, balancing preventative and productivity, and building those rule sets, whether you have 2 or 200 or 2,000 users in Dynamics, is a usable way to approach segregation of duties. But again, if you have questions or if you want to see a link to that ISACA rule set, just let us know and we're more than willing to help you out there. So the last piece here is the manual journal entries. And again, this is something the Oversight Board is pushing hard on. And the reason that they're pushing hard on manual journal entries is because you have a direct impact on financials. And the other reason is because it's manual, you introduce a large risk of human error. So a manual journal entry is something where you go straight into the system, type in a journal entry, and hit post, versus a system journal entry is where you build the posting profiles on a vendor, and when you post a transaction, it's pulling that from the application, right? You don't go in and put build the general ledger distributions each and every time. So with those manual journal entries, what the auditors are looking for, we talked a little bit about this with the audit logging, is the odd times, St. Patrick's Day, odd dates, St. Patrick's Day, odd times, you know, in the middle of the night, times outside of business processes, odd amounts, again, things that are right below a threshold, or 99 cent, or specific numbers they're going to look for, or odd users, right? Why is somebody outside of the financial team, why is somebody on the IT team posting journal entries? Or even better is, why are your consultants posting journal entries? They shouldn't be doing that, or if they are, you need to make sure that you know that and have an explanation of why they're doing that. Or the odd times can be, make sure that you just have explanations. Odd times are, hey, look, the reason we were here on St. Patrick's Day is because we were trying to close the month and we were that late. And yeah, I wasn't pleased with having to work late on St. Patrick's Day, but that's what we were still trying to do. So you have those answers for that. So the biggest thing you can do is be able to pull those reports, address the anomalies, and understand how NAV posting works and be able to explain that to the auditors. So again, if you can do those things, the access, the audit trail logs, the segregation of duties, the manual journal entries, taking that risk-based approach, you're going to be way ahead of the majority of clients that come to us that fall under Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, right, which is very stringent. So I know that I went over time a little bit. I apologize for that, and I think we'll open it up to questions. Does anybody have any questions, comments, witty anecdotes?
Thanks, Andy. That was great. You can either, I'll unmute everyone and see how we do with background noise. But if you have questions, you can also raise your hands and we'll try to get Andy to answer them. Questions? Okay, well, I'm not seeing anything, Andy. So if you have questions, you have our contact information. Certainly send them in afterwards, and the presentation will be available on our website for those who could not make it, so certainly feel free to access it there. Thanks again to Andy, and have a good day, everyone.